How did Wes Huff go from a small YouTuber with about 10,000 subscribers to going on the largest podcast in the world, like Joe Rogan and Patrick Bet-David, completely changing millions of people's views of the Bible and skyrocketing his channel to over 420,000 subscribers? What exactly happened to Billy Carson after all of this? Why are even the fans of Alex O'Connor, one of the most popular atheists on the internet, siding with Wes over Alex? And why are big names like Jordan Peterson all of a sudden saying things about Jesus Christ that they have never said before? Could this all be related? Let's walk through the crazy things that have been happening recently related to Wes Huff, Billy Carson, Jordan Peterson, and more. All of this pretty much started with Billy Carson becoming incredibly famous and going on many of the most popular podcasts in the world because he presented himself as someone with secret knowledge about the Bible and numerous other subjects.
Guess what, guys? I'm one of the foremost world leader in the knowledge on ancient texts and tablets, scriptures, papyruses, and cylinders.
But is Billy right about himself? Billy skyrocketed in his fame when he went onto the Joe Rogan podcast, but he said some things on the podcast that were kind of unusual.
To get us to take orders from them, they inserted something called a worship gene, which was just discovered recently, that human beings have a gene inside of them that can be turned on and turned off. It can be turned off in a laboratory setting. It can also be turned off with a magnetic field around your head. And when it's off, you don't want to worship anything outside of yourself. You look inside, and when it's on, you look to get something from the outside. So this is incredible.
A worship gene that can be turned on and off in a laboratory. It's an interesting theory, but there's just one problem. Billy has absolutely zero evidence for this.
I don't believe we're even from Earth, to be quite honest with you. Our circadian rhythm doesn't even match Earth's rotation on its axis. We're slightly off. It's actually better tuned to Mars' orbit on its rotation on its own axis than
What do
it
you
is
mean?
Earth.
How's that work?
The circadian rhythm of a human body, the wake and sleep cycle, is actually more tuned to Mars' rotation on its own axis, a Mars day versus an Earth day.
I did look that up, and Billy seems to be right about the circadian rhythm thing. But to conclude from that humans aren't from Earth is an interesting theory. Has Billy ever considered that there might be another explanation for that?
Well, there's a lot of dudes, unfortunately, who just get on YouTube and they listen to very charismatic people talk that don't know what they're talking about, which I do all the time. But they do it in a way where they pretend they know something is true that's not true.
Yeah.
And people get sucked into it.
Ironic, isn't it?
Joe isn't talking about Billy here, but what Joe just said kind of sounds like it perfectly describes Billy. Billy Carson also went on Patrick Bet-David's podcast, another one of the largest podcasts in the world. And again, Billy said some things that were pretty puzzling.
In the New Testament, Jesus says, honor your slave master. Now, why would we want to honor a slave master? As you would honor me, he says. Do you think Jesus really would say something like that? I don't.
Except Jesus never said that.
You have to have discernment with what you're reading in the book, in the Bible. In the Bible, where you see the word God everywhere, that's a mistranslation by accident on purpose. The original word is God's with an S. It's always with an S. When you back engineer the actual word, the translations, you find out it's God's, not God singular. Elohim is also a plural term. It's not a singular term.
Yes, the word Elohim is grammatically plural, but throughout the Bible it also takes singular verbs and adjectives, which indicates a singular entity. If anything, the word Elohim might point towards the truth of the Trinity, of God being one in essence and three in person. Here's Billy on a podcast called Flagrant with Andrew Schultz, explaining the Sinai Bible and the Book of Barnabas, which Wes Huff will say more about later.
I'll give you one big translation that's off, is they say, Jesus was crucified.
Whoa.
Well, that doesn't exist in the Sinai Bible.
What happened?
It doesn't exist in the Book of Barnabas. But they left that out of the Bible on purpose, by accident.
So how did they kill him?
They didn't kill him.
And here's Billy explaining the book of Jesus' wife, which Wes will talk more about later too.
In Harvard Library, there is a book of Jesus' wife at the Harvard Seminary School. And they found that about 8 years ago.
Jesus' wife is the Mary Magdalene?
Yeah, which means he probably had kids, and his Merovingian bloodline is still probably walking the land till this very day.
Wow.
And here's Billy talking about a fictional book called The Da Vinci Code, as if it's actual history.
That's in, what was that great book, the Dan Brown book, The Da Vinci Code?
Da Vinci Code, yeah.
Yes.
The Da Vinci Code has been thoroughly debunked by scholars. It's literally fiction that presents itself as history. Billy is really confident he knows the truth about the Ark of the Covenant.
Ark of the Covenant is something that has so much radiation that you had to have on specific type of clothing, which is well described even in the Bible. Rubber boots. When somebody didn't have it on in the Bible and they touched the Ark, they would become very sick. Their hair would fall out, their nose would bleed, their eyes would bleed, their fingernails would fall off.
Oh, Billy.
Billy even points to a scientific study that recreated exactly what he just said.
We created this at a university in America.
Really? What university created this?
Google it. I can't remember the name of the university, but you can look it up.
I did try looking that up, and I couldn't find it, because it doesn't exist. Billy was scheduled to have an informal debate with a Christian about his claims regarding the Bible. But 24 hours before the debate, the Christian asked if Wes Huff, who is more knowledgeable about these topics, could step in for him.
And Mark, very last minute, was like, well, I feel inadequate. Do you think I could just ask Wes? And so he DM'd me on Instagram and just kind of laid this out like, hey, I'm going to have Billy in my studio in 24 hours. I can tell him you're coming, I can tell him who you are. I can like give him your background, but would you be willing to come? And so that's what I did. And so that's how it got set up.
And with only 24 hours to prepare for the biggest debate of his life, Wes then did something that just might never happen again. During this debate, Wes proceeded to completely demolish pretty much everything Billy had said about the Bible. First up, Billy's absurd claims about the quote-unquote Sinai Bible.
The statement is according to the Sinai Bible, okay? According to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible.
Wes pointed out that this just isn't true at all.
I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. When you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there, I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, where it has Jesus being crucified. And that's in Codex Sinaiticus.
Next, Billy's complete lack of knowledge about the Gospel of Barnabas.
I found the text where I was referencing, actually, I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
Besides the fact that Billy didn't actually misquote anything, because we already saw earlier Billy quoting the Sinai Bible for the same thing on another podcast, Wes pointed out that Billy was also completely wrong about the Gospel of Barnabas.
The Gospel of Barnabas, which indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of first century Jewish understanding. It's a known forgery. I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery, yes, but I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit.
Next up, Billy's cluelessness about the book of Jesus' wife.
And then also, one of the things that were interesting is that they discovered the book of Jesus' wife, which is at the Harvard Seminary, which, according to some scholars, is a little controversial, but they claim that this is an accurate record that Jesus may have even been married.
And again, Wes completely dismantles Billy's argument.
Well, hold on, because do you mind if I address the Gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
But I don't know anybody in the field of papyrology, paleography, historiography, who actually refers to these documents as being legitimate.
That's fair enough. I can respect that. So let's go into the Old Testament a little bit.
And then Billy basically lying about the book of Genesis.
Genesis is a much smaller version of a much bigger story, but it's literally almost word for word from the Enuma Elish.
But Wes responded by asking Billy a very simple question.
So what are the parallels there?
Separated the waters from the waters, for example. That's in the Enuma Elish, and that's also in the biblical text.
Okay, that I would agree is a parallel.
So the debate was an absolute disaster for Billy, and after the debate, the threats began. Billy was so humiliated after this debate that he showed up to the podcast host's house in the middle of the night with legal papers.
You freaked out. You freaked out so much that you were knocking at my client's door at 2:30 a.m. in the morning.
Now I got to handle that situation.
With legal papers, acting like you have the power to enforce some type of "you got served."
And then Billy threatened to sue everyone involved with the debate.
Billy Carson is attempting to sue me. But unfortunately for Billy, agreeing to a debate losing that debate and feeling embarrassed about that loss does not constitute legitimate grounds to litigate. Billy, I will agree to all the terms and conditions of the cease and desist letter that you have sent me if you agree to run it back, sit down with me in person, and have another discussion. This is my formal response.
Billy's trying to sue me. And he's trying to sue me because I got him on a podcast with a real historian who debunked all his BS in terms of Christianity.
But Billy was about to find out that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The Streisand effect is the idea that when a person tries to silence people from talking about something, even more people end up hearing about that thing. And that's exactly what happened when Billy tried to silence Wes Huff. John McCray from What Do You Mean has made several videos covering this story, with a total of well over 2 million views.
You're probably aware of Billy Carson's disastrous debate with Wes Huff, where Wes completely dismantled his objections to Christianity. And ironically, despite Billy going on a mission to attack the God of the Bible, all of this is what led Joe Rogan to invite Wes on his podcast to discuss the debate, and Rogan didn't hold back, saying this about Billy.
Listen, I like Billy, but it's very unfortunate when people get caught with their pants down.
Likewise, Brandon from Daily Dose of Wisdom has also made several videos with millions of views as well.
What's happening right now on the internet is amazing, and I am absolutely here for it. Let's just go through a couple of the quick plot points of literally the last month and how they build on top of each other to form a narrative of what is taking place right now in culture. First, there was the Billy Carson and Wes Huff debate.
And after Billy drew so much attention to himself by trying to silence people who did nothing wrong, Billy responded with one of the most disastrous live streams ever. During a live stream that was over 3 hours long, Billy ostracized even more of his fans and dug an even deeper hole for himself. Billy bragged about how rich he was and insulted his audience, calling them dumb, poor people.
We have 5 AC units, and I don't even know which one of them is acting up. I normally take the elevator upstairs. You know, I've had a chef for 10 years, and they like the food from coming over and eating the food at our house, and now they share our chef. You know, we are hopping off of a private jet. We relaxed in a huge 8,500 square foot mansion with our best friends on a tiny private island. I'm actually sleeping in my movie theater. In my house, I have a movie theater. I'm sleeping in the movie theater.
But what really set fans off was his blatant mockery about those who he deemed poor, especially 9-to-5 workers.
This is what they try to do when you get famous, you see? I let a lot of it slip because a lot of these people are just ignorant, poor people. You know, they're just poor people. They're just ignorant. So I let a lot of it, whatever, man. These people are just poor dummies. You know, what can you do? I make more money than rappers. I'm not a Joe Schmo 9-to-5 worker bee. You thought I was just some dumb black guy that just happened to get a little lucky with a couple of clips online and gain some popularity. Like Kendrick Lamar say, they not like us. They not like us.
And then Billy revealed exactly why he's suing the people involved with the debate. And the reason was pretty evil.
The money that you thought you were making and the popularity you thought you were making is all going to be spent on attorney's fees. And I don't care if I win or lose. I just want you to spend money.
The backlash against Billy's unhinged live stream was so immediate and so intense that Billy quickly deleted his entire live stream and issued an apology to his followers. Billy's apology to his followers included this. I want to start by offering a sincere and heartfelt apology to the Forbidden Knowledge community. So no apology to Wes Huff or Anton Wisbiski, just to his followers. In my last response video, some of the things I said and the way I expressed them were not aligned with the true vision and purpose of Forbidden Knowledge. I want to officially apologize to our Forbidden Knowledge family for any words or tones that may have been out of alignment with our shared values. By this point, even many of Billy's biggest fans had already lost their respect for Billy. Some thought things might now be over after Billy's apology. But then, on December 30, 2024, Wes posted this on X. So, something pretty incredible happened today. Attached was a photo of Wes with Joe Rogan, the biggest podcast host in the country. Things were about to escalate even more. Wes Huff's appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast went absolutely viral and now has over 5 million views and is one of the most viewed videos on Joe Rogan's YouTube channel. During this podcast, Wes revealed more about Billy's dishonesty and bullying tactics.
It's interesting because Mark Menard, who was the guy who hosted this interaction, he sent Mark a handwritten one, and then he eventually gave Mark an official one from his lawyers.
And in response, Joe Rogan said this about Billy Carson.
It's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate.
When you get caught with your pants down, you're supposed to say, I got caught with my pants down.
Yeah.
That's what you're supposed to do. Like,
yeah.
It's the only, especially if you're public, like it's very clear that you're incorrect.
But more importantly, Joe asked Wes some pretty important questions about the Bible and Christianity, such as what Wes thinks about the resurrection.
So what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
And in response, Wes delivered a strong defense of the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
But the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So,
how do you fact-check someone coming back from the dead?
Well,
how many people saw his body, right?
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion.
And everything that happened after this Joe Rogan podcast was pretty incredible. After this podcast, Protestia posted on X, Rogan episode likely to be the furthest reaching gospel broadcast in history. And the Joe Rogan podcast account even reposted this, which is incredible considering how hostile to Christianity Joe Rogan used to be. But not everyone was a fan of what Wes said on the Joe Rogan podcast. Alex O'Connor, one of the most popular atheists on the internet, made a video critiquing some things Wes said on the Joe Rogan podcast.
But one of the things that shocked them about Isaiah was that it was word for word identical to the Masoretic text.
Word for word?
Word for word.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that would be amazing if it were true. In fact, the Dead Sea version of the Isaiah scroll is not quite identical to the Masoretic text.
But Alex's critiques turned out to be so incredibly weak that even his audience turned on him for being so biased. The top commenter said this, so I checked into the Isaiah 2, 9-10 missing text. Oddly enough, those missing words appear in a few of the other DSS of chapter 2 in the DSS. Seems like Huff is essentially correct. Wes then responded to the things Alex criticized him about in a video pointing out the places where he was imprecise during the Joe Rogan podcast.
Was my hyperbolic statement to Rogan a dishonest attempt to pull the wool over Rogan and his audience's eyes? No. Was I participating in disingenuous and underhanded apologetic tactics to try and gain points at the expense of truth? No. Should I have been more careful in my statement on Rogan about the Great Isaiah Scroll and used much more precise language, something to the effect of nearly identical rather than word for word identical, in order to not bring unnecessary and unfortunate scrutiny upon my discussion with him? Yes, but I hope you can see why I said what I said, and forgive me for my lack of precision. Discussing the intricacies of textual criticism to a general audience is not always easy, and in the course of a 3-hour podcast, conversational style, pulled off the top of my head on this big platform, I was not nearly as accurate as I should or could have been in this instance.
Wes was also invited onto the Patrick Bet David podcast, another one of the largest podcasts in the world. Billy's plan to silence Wes Huff continued to backfire tremendously, as Wes continued to expose Billy on the Patrick Bet David podcast.
People like Billy are very confident in the way that they say things, but that confidence isn't always backed up with the reality of the evidence.
It's pretty incredible that a solid Christian like Wes is being noticed by such big names like Joe Rogan and Patrick Bet David, who are happy to help amplify his voice, even though they had both previously hosted Billy Carson.
I found out about my guest today, Wes Huff, by a debate that he did with Billy Carson. And Billy Carson, who's been on our podcast before.
And soon after all of this, Jordan Peterson said something he had never said before about Jesus Christ. I still think there are some open questions about Jordan Peterson's Christian faith, but Jordan said something recently about Jesus' divinity that he had never said before.
Okay, what's the game? What's the story? I mentioned earlier, it's voluntary self-sacrifice. Right, you offer yourself up in the service of something higher. That's the basis of society. That's the basis of psychological stability. The Christian insistence is that that's the basis of the world.
I'm going to ask you again because I want to be clear. Is what is the God you believe in?
I think that the claim that Christ is the embodiment of the prophet and the laws, I think that's true.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's complicated. It's very, very complicated, but I think it's true.
So you believe that Jesus was
God?
God.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Jordan said in clarity about Jesus' divinity is related at all to Wes Huff's defense of Christianity on the Joe Rogan podcast, but whatever exactly is happening, it does seem that there seems to be a big culture shift in how people are viewing Jesus and Christianity. So what's next after all of this? Everything that has happened related to Joe Rogan, Billy Carson, and Wes Huff is exciting because millions of people are learning more about the Bible and the gospel of Jesus Christ. At the same time, nothing really changes in terms of what we as Christians are called to do. We should always be working towards proclaiming the gospel of sin and salvation to the world, regardless of how much success we are experiencing. We know that God is sovereign, and his perfect sovereign plan will always be accomplished. And that's what our ultimate hope is in.
His eyes are like a flame of fire. On his head are many diadems, and he has a name written that no one knows but himself. He's clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and the name by which he is called is the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of the God Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh, he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That's my Jesus. That's the God whom I serve.
Hey, I'm Mike. If you want to support what I'm doing and help these videos reach more people, would you consider clicking that subscribe button? Thank you so much for watching this video until the end. Here is another one that you might find interesting.